Hi everyone. Today we have Jesse O'Brien, a member of our LMAC committee, and he's here to present about putting your lawn to bed for the winter.
Okay, so it's nice to be here. We'll go through some slides and any questions anyone has, we certainly answer them as we go along. Couple things just to kind of get a little about my background. I am indeed part of the LMAC committee on Portland and South Portland. I'm also the chair of the Integrated Pest Management Council of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. And was an adjunct professor of University of Maine at Orono for turf management for about 9 years, a couple decades ago. So get a little background in this, and it's a really a great subject, and I like to appreciate anyone listening in. So that is a wind up, and I'll get to the next slide. So the outline today is to have questions. First subject I want to talk about is the weather. I like to say the weather is every year is different, every year is the same. It's about the weather. So I like to just kind of overview that a little bit, how it deals with turf and lawns. Talk about lawns, and there's a lot of anti-lawn talk out there, but I think it's an important part of the landscape. It can be functional, beneficial, and I want you to consider lawn as an environmental asset so long as you take care of it in a certain way. And at the end of it, some tools and tasks, problems, expectations, kind of the how-to type of things that we can do to maintain the lawn and perhaps improve the lawn. Clicker. So hard to speak on this subject on just a few slides. So there'll be some things I may not say much about, but any questions you have, I'll certainly be happy to answer those. Things are changing, and certainly a change in Portland, South Portland, is how to take care of, and indeed all of Southern Maine, how to take care of turf management and stuff. So it will continue to change. The information I give is information that's been collected over the years from the universities throughout New England, Department of Agriculture, Conservation, Forestry, Cooperative Extension, Board of Pesticide Control. So this information is basically you get on websites that say .edu aspects of them or .gov. Now we're in Maine, and I want to be mindful that we're in Maine. There are a lot more. There's a lot of types of issues in other parts of the country that don't affect us. We're just going to focus on things that are affecting us. Going to speak to the urban, suburban environmental issues, and just let you know, care about the environment and its stewardships, and I'd rather work outdoors than indoors. The overall theme will be about balance. Clicker. So here we go with the weather. There is a website. There's many, many websites about weather, as you probably know, but this is one that we kind of look at. I look at, and some of my colleagues look at, is the Northeast Regional Climate Center. It's sponsored by Cornell University. You can just type that in, and you would come up with that. One of the good things is one of their stations that they monitor is in Portland. And so it's we get some good data from this source. So just review of this past year, this past July. July was the second hottest July ever, second month of all time hottest. So you can see the average temperatures increasing from the average by quite a bit. The rainfall was down a little bit from previous years. So we've had a very hot and somewhat dry July. Clicker. Now, this particular website you can spend a lot of time on, and it has all kinds of these nice maps, up-to-date maps and things, and different types of subjects. So I'm just going to bring up 6 of them, just talking about them and dealing with turf. But there's many, many other things on this website that will be pertinent to horticulture, be pertinent to agriculture in the state of Maine. Well, we look on the one to the left, it's the amount of rain that we had in July. You can see we are at a deficit, certainly down in York and southern Cumberland County. However, if you the map to the right, if we look back from last August to this July, we have a lot of moisture in the ground. So it's we've been wet the last 12 months, save this last month that we're down a little bit. Clicker. So August so far, from 4th to the 10th, is looking a little wetter than July. So we're kind of getting back, getting that deficit up a little bit to it. So that is good, and that is helping out the turf around town too. The screen to the right where it says potential evapotranspiration, that's a good indicator of how long this rain or this moisture in the ground will stay. First, you all know evaporation. Water evaporates into the air when it's hot. And also there's transpiration that happens. And transpiration is moisture coming through leaf surfaces, trees, shrubs, grasses, and that. And sometimes that transpiration is greatly increased during weather conditions and not as much in other conditions. And this is just the potential of evapotranspiration that we could occur. So that's kind of a neat map to look at every once in a while. Clicker. So the next two maps are really don't have a lot to do with the talk today, but just basically just say what the neat maps that are there. The one to the left is a GDD difference on normal days. What that means is growing degree days. I don't know if anyone familiar with that, but basically what growing degree days is starting in the Northeast, they start at March 15th and they record the temperature in all these different spots around the Northeast. And if it's above 50 degrees, and say it's 55 degrees, they would say +5. If it's 45 degrees, they would go -5. And they continue that tracking throughout the summer. Now, what that number that signifies is gives a measurement of the heat units that are in the ground in the plant materials, and it can predict when certain things happen in the animal kingdom, such as insects breaking, starting to be dormancy, starting to grow, starting to move. Also can predict pollinators, flowers when pollinators flower, and also can predict diseases. So that is, if you're really intensively doing things such as agriculture or some types of horticulture, this is an important aspect to do so you can plan any types of control if you are worrying about pest issues. So that's kind of a neat map, and it is tremendous information for the sort of the intense type of horticultural operation. And the one to the right is just basically temperatures, how temperatures differ a little bit, and you can look at that from a month to month, see the difference. So that's just a quick overview of the types of things we have. Bottom line is right now we're experiencing some moisture, but we did have a really stressful July.
Hey, Jesse, I have a question if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah.
Can we, the evapotranspiration, can you tell us like how would someone who's growing gardens or with some turf, how would that be important to them? What would it tell them?
Well, basically, to understand that there are ways that moisture leaves the ground more than just drainage,
Mm.
number one. And then we have low humidity, when we have clear skies, bright sun, the amount of water that is being evaporated from natural sources and the ability for the plant to hold on the water is decreased.
Mm.
So it can wick a lot of water out of the growing area, the root source, rooting area. So that is important to understand when the timing, if you do want to irrigate, when timing of irrigate would be. So if we're going to have a high points of view, a high evapotranspiration potential, irrigating that morning before or some other time of that would be important. If we had a very cloudy day, a very high humidity, we probably don't need to irrigate. The water is staying in there. So I guess a long way to go to answer your question. The biggest thing is that's important as far as irrigation water.
Great. So if you looked ahead, you can determine, you can use your water more judiciously, basically, and use it when you need it and maybe
Yeah.
not when you don't. Yeah.
Real intense turf applications such as the golf course and performance type turf applications, the irrigation systems will have a weather station, and that weather station will do many things that we just talked about automatically with the types of collection of data and putting it in the computer and delivering the amount of water that's the minimum amount of water that's necessary for that turf application. don't have a whole lot of that. Well, we do have some in Maine for sure, but that is a really important tool when you go down the southwest of the country and you want to deliver as minimal amount of water as absolutely possible. All right. Any other questions out there? That's a good one, Droid. All right, let's skip to the next. So, why is turf grass important? Well, it's part of the landscape, but it's not all landscape. And I think the anti-turf movement that's there, it's how we take care of it. I think it's where we need some attention. But turf in general is an asset. Now, why do we have to do so much to it? Well, we ask a lot out of turf. We mow it, we put it all kinds of different places. We put thousands of grass plants shoulder to shoulder, and real tight spacing of them. Lots of competition, other trees and other pest issues, lots of types of different soils. And we're doing something very unnatural with turf grass. Plants like to be kind of by themselves. They don't have to be a huge density so they can grow or stuff. And we put them at huge densities. Now, when we have those densities so tight, there's a lot of competition for the amount of moisture in that soil, the amount of sunlight it receives, and the amount of nutrients that are there. So for us to kind of maintain the turf in that way, we may have to do some supplemental fertilization and supplemental irrigation. Conversely to hay ground, where grasses grow for that big hay right now for pets, horses, things like that that's out there right now. That density is far less than the density that is we require on turf. We bigger clumps. So basically, depending on the application, is the intensity of management that we may have to have. But above all, turf grass is very resilient. It can take a beating, keep on coming back. Now, these last two slides is basically, I could expand on these. I will expand on to the rest of the talk. But there are important things that we have to keep in mind what turf is. First was a water permeable surface. Now, there's limits to the amount of water it can hold. Sometimes with these downpours we occasionally get, there's some ponding that will happen, and there's some runoff. But up to about 2 inches or so long as the grade is somewhat not necessarily a big slope, turf can absorb that type of rain, somewhat a moderate to a gentle rain, and collecting that first 2 inches the first inch of water is where most of the pollutants that are floating around can be absorbed into the soil and down to the roots. Now, when that water is in that soil, we have a natural filter system that are there. Turf is a heavily bacteria colonized area, and those bacteria, as water goes through that soil, will latch on to some of the other heavy metals, have other types of pollutants, and break them down. In addition to do things good for the turf. And that thatch layer is a very important aspect for harboring a lot of bacteria, as well as the roots and the organic matter in the soil. So it is a very important aspect to it. Even my most anti-turf people, I shouldn't say anti-turf, my most environmentalist people know there's a very important part of a role that turf plays in urban and suburban environments to keep the water clean. So, and then we have a multifunctional surface. I mean, we can do all kinds. You can park cars on it sometimes. You can have events on it and other aspects to it. So it's an extension. It's a surface for extension of outdoor living space. It basically it's a surface to direct people to go certain places in a property and a larger property aspect to it. So there's all aspects to it. And the last thing that we'll talk a little more about later, it is a carbon sink. And in science, we talk about sinks where things collect. Basically, the types of grasses that would grow, they lose in the summer that we just passed in July, they lost about maybe a third to a half of their root system, died because of so much stress that was there. And those roots will die and they will become organic matter in the soil. They also will have a lot of carbon in them. They're basically cellulose, and cellulose will have high contents of carbon. And that carbon goes into the soil, and it is sequestered into that soil. And it is basically exactly how the soils were built up for the eons out in the Great Plains, that they were a foot deep, and it was that same sort of surface that would happen is the grasses would die either by weather conditions, being too hot or too dry, or as herds of wild animals came down and chewed them right down to the nubs, and those roots would die. So it does build up organic matter in the soil and carbon, and this is a known phenomenon for a long time. And in fact, some of what the scientists have found out, that soils and grasses can sequester more carbon than things such as the rainforests in the Amazon. This is the known, that's the scientific fact on it. So that's something is an important aspect to it. But again, it's how you take care of it to get the most benefit out of that. And the most important aspect is it's established vegetation quickly, especially with all the building that goes on, all the things that go on to disturbing the soils. We need something that will germinate, root in, and hold that soil together. After these heavy rainfalls, we look at brooks and streams, and out in Casco Bay, it turned muddy, brown. Well, erosion is a natural phenomenon. Erosion is an important part to cycle nutrients, and it is plants and animals have benefit by erosion for eons. However, in the suburban environment, and urban environment, erosion is accelerated greatly. So the more plant material, the more things we can do to keep that water on the property, the better. Okay, I went on too long with that one. I'm going to click there. Just a little science, but I just talked about. There's a lot of research. UNH, UConn has done research that we talked about. Is basically this is turf plants. The turf is an important part as far as sequestering and storing that carbon. Now, trees do take carbon. Trees can capture carbon. However, the trees may be cut down, removed. It is when trees die and they are decomposed and they are consumed by the soil is when they start sequestering that carbon. So there is carbon capture, which is important. Carbon sequester is what we're talking about with turf aspects of it. All right, any questions on that? All right, let's click on. Well, the next big issue that we have, one of the issues is the size of the lawn, and everyone, it's pretty much a personal preference, and it's but some people are somewhat concerned. Environmentally, we may want to be concerned about that too. But lawns that are used for recreation, relaxation, and other types of services are important, and that really aren't too much of an issue. Can anyone hear that background noise? Someone's on a chainsaw.
Nope, I can't hear anything.
All right. Okay. So, if you use the lawn and you use it on a regular basis, that's important and it's fine, and you should have plenty of space to do what you like to do. Consideration is if you have lawn areas that you really don't use that much, maybe some other things that you can do with that lawn. And there's a whole host of stuff. It's a webinar, 3 or 4 webinars in that, from rain gardens that you could do to pollinator gardens, to all kinds of aspects, or a vegetable garden or fruit or whatever aspect that you have on that. So there's all kinds of things that might want to be considered. A lot of people just don't mind to have large areas, but they don't want to have big permanent things such as structures or perhaps big trees. They want to be able to use that property. Perhaps they may want to be able to use that property in the future, but they want it to look neat. And there are many things that you can do in addition to what I just talked about, using plant materials that you can use. You can mow maybe once or twice a year and still maintain that property. before I get into talking about that, there's always a downside to stuff. And having this other types of plant material that you can mow once or twice a year, things you want to be cautious about. Sometimes you can get some unwanted plant material that will come into that, such as unwanted weeds, invasive woody plants, especially. So that has to be you have to be concerned about. The second aspect, there are also types of uh, 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 vectors that may be carried by ticks and mosquitoes in these types of areas. Ticks basically in a turf that is, let's say, that's not much higher than your ankle. That's not a good environment for ticks. However, you get ticks, however, you have turf material up to about your shin high or so, that's and knee high, that's a good environment for ticks. So that's something to be cautious about. And then the other thing is when you have these large areas, sometimes you have troublesome wildlife that will happen. And our house that right now looks like we're almost a jungle of all the stuff that I planted around here is a great habitat for groundhogs. And we had neighbors a couple years ago, a couple neighbors ago. That makes sense. A couple neighbors ago, were big vegetable gardens, and they had a bunch of heather hearts traps all pointed in our direction to pick up the groundhogs and stuff. So that's something to be concerned about too. And the last aspect to talk about lawn slides that I just want to make a quick mention to. A few years ago, there's an incredible drought out in California, and the state decided that they would give $1 a square foot for people to remove their turf so they would not water their turf. And the idea was to put other types of plant material there. But the unintended consequence was people took that money of $1 square foot and purchased artificial plastic grass to there. And basically how I kind of found this out is just talking to some of the colleagues that did sell these material and saying they couldn't get hands on that material because most of all that material is going out to California for these particular jobs. So it doesn't happen a lot. Like I said, I want to be mindful in Maine, but yeah, artificial grass. We want to. Let's say one more thing. If I was an athletic director and we had all these sports there, spring and fall sports, I would like to have a surface like artificial plastic grass where we wouldn't have to call rainouts we use all the time. So I think there is a place for it. But just in Maine and doing my driving around, talking to customers and doing deliveries, there are areas that plastic turf is starting to show up in certain aspects to it. So, all right, let's clear it. So there's all kinds of grass species that we can use that will only need occasional mowing. Long list of aspects. You can do that. You can pick and choose to it. Clicker. And then you can kind of zero in a little bit for certain types of areas. And one particular area that would be a good candidate is places that is difficult to grow anything on it. And some things they call these poverty grasses, I guess, is what they'll talk about. But these are things that maybe rocky, gravelly types of soils. And basically, the kind of growth habit is a thin, wispy grass, clumpy growth, light seeding rates. And these are some of the fewer things that you can put down on that. And you would mow that perhaps once a year, high. And typically, the best time to mow these types is basically about early fall or so. One of the reasons why you want to mow things is if there's any invasive plants, especially woody invasive plants, that will help keep them from getting established. The last selection of plant I had is called deer tongue, and deer tongue is not necessarily a grass, but deer tongue is a good plant that can grow in those types of areas, and also it also hosts a lot of other types of insects that would need some food in places where they would go, and that's another reason to plant different types of plant material. Okay, click out. Now, base of the talk. Fall's a great time. So this is basically why. Late summer, this time of year right now, probably last week could have started. till early fall, say about, I usually say about mid-September. We've been having mild falls over the years. Probably the first week of October is a great time to establish seed or sod. Reasons being, we've got cooler temperatures during the day. Typically, we got more rainfall and we have shorter days. And when we have shorter days, we have less pressures with weeds. Most of the most aggressive weeds like to have long days, over 12 hours of 12, 13 hours of light. As fall equinox that comes through, basically we're having less and less time of sunshine. Weeds, the more aggressive weeds don't germinate. We also have warm soil temperatures, since warm soil temperatures are very important as far as life for the bacteria and the grass plants growing. So great time to do that on for all those reasons. And one more thing on weed pressure is, you can seed in May if you wanted to, or June or July, whenever. But those aggressive weed seeds, especially crabgrass, could dominate your seeding in it if you miss the critical watering period in establishing that seed. Now, I'm going to leave this open because more for questions than anything else, because depending on people's types of lawns they have, but new seeding areas is a great time to do it. Also, as far as the established lawn area, you can do things called overseeding aspect to it to increase the population of seed that's there. Now, there's overseeding, there's things called slice seeding, there's things called terrace seeding. There's all kinds of aspects to it, but they're all about the same thing. They use different types of equipment aspects to it. But we can talk about that if you like. A next type of thing that can be done is aeration of a lawn. Now, one of the things is the biggest enemy of turf is compaction. The turf needs water, it needs nutrients, it also needs air. And air in the soil helps promote bacteria. And when you have a healthy, functioning families of bacteria, it helps break down organic matter and helps make nutrients available to the grass plant. So that aeration is a great time to do that. The aeration is let me we'll skip over that. And then the last three things, top dressing is a good aspect. And top dressing you can do with, say, things such as compost to add some organic matter in the soil, or some other types of soil to level things off. Lime and fertilizing is a great time to put that down based on what the soil tests are. So fall is a great time, all kinds of things to do. Thing is, we want to have a balanced approach and we want to do the right thing. And next slide. Oh, I should do this slide came in. And this is just a kind of a graphic of why this is important. As we can see in the top picture, we see the shoot growth in the spring in June, and heading to July, it starts to tail off. In August, it tails off and then shoots up in the fall. We also see the root growth in the fall starts to grow. So basically, any of these operations that we do, such as core aeration, it does damage the grass plants because we are poking holes into the turf. However, the grass is growing very well. They're able to heal better, recover better, quicker in the fall than they would, say, in the summer, or doing it over in the later fall or early spring. The picture down at the bottom, we'll get to that at the end, but this is a different type of grass. These are what's called warm season grasses. The grasses that we grow up here in the left-hand corner that sort of have a cycle that will slow down in the summer and pick up again in the fall. We'll talk about this in a minute. Okay, clicker. So when we do those operations, we are trying to get the best of the quality of turf that we want to have. An important consideration of that, in addition to all that I just mentioned, is type of genus or species of grasses that we use. And there's a lot of science that goes into there. Oodles and oodles of information about the different types of grasses are there, and the pluses and minuses, advantages, disadvantages of them. And I've always, in the past, I would have some pictures of grasses out there, And to be honest with you, they all look the same and they're all boring. And if I go to talks about grasses, I get bored to hell looking at all these types of grasses. So I'm just going to put this one here, and we can talk about the same thing a little bit. So we look at the map of the North America. We can see it's sectioned in three areas: cool season grasses, transitional zone, warm season grasses. We typically will talk about cool season grasses here, and cool season grasses of the graphic I just showed you. So here are our choices that we have. The first one is tall fescue. Now, if you happen to look at some lawns, and then you see a kind of a thick grass, a wide-bladed grass growing faster in a sort of a clump area in the lawn all by itself, more than likely that is a tall fescue. And probably the tall fescue is what's called a variety called Kentucky 31. It was a grass that's used extensively because it was cheap, it was tough, it would grow very well. However, it's really not a good lawn grass. It'd be fine for a roadside and certain applications, but sometimes they find their way into a lawn mix, and they're kind of a problem. Then we'll skip over that, and we'll go to the fine leaf fescues. And this is a genus of fescues that's grown in the state. And there is some evidence, I'm talking to an extension agent, that the creeping red fescue is the only native grass in New England, northern New England. I'm not quite sure. No one really markets that as that, but it is a grass that had been grown in North America pre-1600. And fescues have a unique ability. They don't take much fertility. They don't take a lot of water. They don't use a lot of water in the growing aspects to it. They can tolerate some shade aspect to it. They're a little thinner in texture, and they don't like the heat. So since we've got some good rain, but if you remember back in July, some lawns were all brown. Those lawns typically were lawns that predominantly had a lot of fine leaf fescue in there because they couldn't take the heat. Also, the fine leaf fescue can't take a lot of foot traffic, so it wouldn't be good for like in a heavily trafficked area. The bottom grass, perennial ryegrass, is a good grass. It germinates very quickly, can take a lot of traffic. But what happens with perennial ryegrass? It kind of peters out 2 or 3 years. It doesn't keep replicating itself. And the final grass is Kentucky bluegrass. Kentucky bluegrass is the Cadillac of bluegrass. Not Cadillac, dating myself. So Lexus of bluegrasses. It is a nice smooth grass. The middle picture of Midnight is a variety of that Kentucky bluegrass. Has a nice texture of mows well, and it spreads by underground root systems called rhizomes. However, you don't take care of Kentucky bluegrass with proper watering, proper nutrition, it does go south pretty quickly and stuff. The final grass I want to talk about is, and those are all cool season grass that we talked about. The next one I want to talk about, because we see what the July temperatures were so hot. One grass that can tolerate the heat better than the fine fescue, better than the other grasses, is the tall fescue that we talked about. And there's been a huge amount of science done and breeding that's been done since about the 70s and 80s with tall fescue. And that tall fescue really performs very well during the summer. It's a deep-rooted plant. It has a very thick, waxy cuticle on it, so it doesn't transpire a lot of moisture as the other grasses do. So that is something you should consider for new lawns and new seedings. We've been growing turf-type tall fescue for 25 years or so. It hasn't really caught on that well as far as sod applications, but the jobs we put it on, I think they really perform pretty good. So these are choices that we have. Now, there are some grasses that are out there that people have that are a true transitional zone grass, such as the tall fescue. And one of those grasses is zoysia grasses. And if you ever go down south and you walk out on turf, which doesn't quite look like our turf down there, and it's sort of spongy, pretty good chances that's a zoysia grass. Now, there are a few properties in Portland and other areas that has this zoysia grass, and it looks great right now. Beautiful grass. However, right around Thanksgiving or so, that grass starts to go dormant because it is a warm season grass, and it turns straw brown. And it's straw brown all winter until it perks up a little bit, probably mid to late May or so. Now, as we're saying, the weather's changing a little bit. Is going to zoysia grass, and I would recommend start doing that. Not quite. I would probably start recommending looking at turf type 12 fescue more than fine fescues and bluegrass. So let's click on. So up on the where it's kind of cut off a little bit, it says Down East Park Mixture. Those are the titles of them. It can say sports turf, it can say sun and shade, whatever. Those are all fine, but what you got to look at is the types of what the small print is and the percentages of grasses there, and depending on what your application is. So when you buy seed, just don't go for the title, see what's in there, and depending on your application, if this is a shady area, you want to have more percentage of fescues there so they can tolerate the shade. If it's something that you're going to use a lot, you want to go a little heavier on the bluegrass. Okay, click on. The next aspect that's important and it's a great time of year to really address this is a line that I stole from someone else is don't treat your soil like dirt. The better the soil, the better the roots. The thing is that we all look at lawns, we're looking at the grass plants. The thing is we want to look at the roots, and occasionally we want to kind of open up that root system and see we have roots a good 4, 5, 6 inches deep. That is important. If we have the root systems only a couple inches deep, we're kind of asking for trouble. The grass won't be as resilient as that. So, and what best way to get good roots is have good soil. Clicker. And get good soil is that of a soil test. Now, you guys did have someone talk about soil tests here, correct? You had Jason.
Yep, we did.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and that was a lot of people listen to that.
Yep, it was good. It was a good talk.
Okay, yeah. So anyways, I won't go over that. I will just say when I look at a soil test, the first two numbers I look is the percentage of organic matter in that soil. 5% is awesome. But if you didn't have quite 5%, you had 3.5. That's still workable. And the other aspect that I take a look at is base saturation, and I'll talk about that in a second. But a soil test, we got to find out where you are on soils and then address those issues. And back to the whole key of this talk, we want the soil to get in balance. All right, clicker. And then compost is an important aspect. There's all kinds of good things it has. There's good compost and there's bad compost. Fall's a great time to kind of add a little compost into the top dress over the top of it. You will indeed get some nutrients, and you will indeed have a green up to do it, but compost is not fertilizer. Compost is a soil conditioner. Compost doesn't always have a guaranteed analysis of the amount of nutrients they have, and putting too much compost that has perhaps phosphorus in it over the years could be detrimental, perhaps be a problem aspect to it. But the fact of the matter is adding a little bit of compost is food source. It's basically a carbon food source of the microbes, and those microbes are bacteria-laden microbes that are in a turf system. Will consume them and will expand their population. And there's a bunch of other things that are out there that are important too. There's humic acid, fulvic acid. We can talk about that if you like. Helps amino acids. There's all kinds of things there. But the bottom line is compost is a soil conditioner. It will help add structure to the soil. It will also be a food source of microorganisms. Clicker. And fertilizer itself, the nutrient fertilizer itself, on the soil test, basically is the three major nutrients is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. We want those in a certain balance. But please don't think fertilizer is food. Fertilizer is just getting the soil in balance, so it will create the healthiest type of plant material. In this case, this cropping system is turf to grow. Food for green plants is what? Did I wake everybody up? I'm sorry.
Is well, the
What
like so minerals and um,
food for green plants comes from the sun,
right.
photosynthesis, and that's photosynthesis creates sugars, and that is the food. So we want the nutrients to be in balance to make sure that the most important system on Earth, photosynthesis, is at its peak condition, peak cycling of it. So that is an important aspect to it. And then as far as fertilizers, follow the BMP's best management practice of them. Organic fertilizer can be just as harmful as mineral fertilizer if not done properly. Compost, if you dump some compost on a hot top driveway and we have a downpour and it starts washing down into the storm drain, that's an issue. So you want to make sure you use these products properly. And then when you do have organic fertilizers, is apply them when the grass is dry, and then water them in. I could do a whole seminar on that anyway, so click on. And then, as I talked a little bit, and we'll start wrapping up here, is this base saturation is an important aspect to it. And basically, one of the things is to things in balance. This will help flocculate the soil, which is a fancy word to open up the soil pores, the micropores in the soil, and create something, have some oxygen that will help benefit the microbes. So that base saturation is important. And as far as my work with producing sod, our yield is better. Our harvest dates are more predictable when we have the base saturation in the correct limits. Okay, skip the next one. Mow high, deep roots, very important. Just a graphic, but basically mow at least mow at the middle section of your lawnmower, if not the fourth aspect to it. And then the high, you lose some density of the grass, but you have deep roots, and deeper roots is just as important as green growth. Clicker. And then irrigation, water deeply and infrequently. We want, again, deep roots, and we can train roots to go deeper by irrigation, deep, long, infrequent, deep irrigation events, as opposed to frequent and light irrigation events. And also, if you do have an irrigation system, make sure you use it in balance with natural rainfall. Okay, clicker. So I'm just gonna kind of end it here. I just want to say, typically on this, there's always issues about pests and stuff, but people are pretty good pests that are out there too, that we got to be concerned about. Insects, weeds, our issues, diseases, also abiotic and biotic disease, and overall in pests. The most things we have to teach is tolerance and patience on things. And I think that is probably as important as anything. So I've got 3 slides, and I'm going to go this quick, and then hopefully you guys can give me a couple questions, and we can end it out here. So next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, the 4 slides. IPM is a process. There's a scientific process that we all do that are in the industry. We all do it automatically. We could always do a little bit better, but there's all kinds of different types of strategies that we use to minimize, to make sure the plants grow properly, to minimize any types of inputs, whether it's a pesticide, organic or inorganic, or the fertilizers. We could do a little bit better on the recording and mapping of it, I think, but we do a pretty good job on making sure that we monitor stuff, identify the pests and some other aspects. So I'd like to just get that out there, because since I am the chair of the IPM Council, it's important that we talk about that. Next slide. So one of the top pests in turf that I get is grubs. And grubs, this is at this particular stage, it's called breakthrough. The secondary animals that come in and kind of forage after the white little grubs that are there. It's an issue. It's an issue. This is not the cosmetic issue. I hate using the word. This is not an aesthetic issue. This is damage. This is destruction of the turf. Next slide. Crabgrass galore out there right now. And crabgrass is a tough one to control based on when we started, we talked about cool season grasses. Well, all the cool season grasses don't grow well in the middle of summer. However, crabgrass is a C4. It has metabolism that grows well when it's hot. In fact, it grows better when it's hot. So right now we have a weed that is just out competing the cool season grasses. It is also an annual grass with kind of complicated stuff, and it is a survivor. It can shoot out all kinds of tillers and seeds and just repopulate an area very, very quickly and stuff. So it is a problem. Organically, corn gluten meal. Even my friends that grow are organic practitioners will say corn gluten meal is spotty at best. So this crab is a tough problem. The best way is to have a healthy, dense stand of grass to minimize the amount of crabgrass that's there. And the final one, we got to have a truce on weeds. These two weeds kind of we talk about the most, the dandelions and clover. There's benefits to both. I don't know if people are really going to be tolerant of a stand of dandelions that I'm showing, or huge clover patches, but we got to have a little more truce on these types of weeds and stuff and tolerate some of the stuff. Now weeds do have problems. They don't tolerate foot traffic that well, and there's other types of issues we want to be concerned about, aspects to it, but we get little tolerance. And you get that last slide, be happy to answer any questions.
Cool. I have some questions, Jesse, actually. I mean, thinking about your last slide, just to start with. So typically in the past, wasn't clover part of a lot of turf mixes
It
back in
was.
the day?
It was indeed. It was indeed. And then, unfortunately, some people, some children got stung, and then somehow that got turned around. We don't want clover, and I still have people that will talk about, do you have clover in your turf? And I said, well, I can get some for you. No, I don't want any clover because I'm worried about that. So indeed, it was in there. It is there's a lot more acceptance of it right now. One of my colleagues in Rhode Island, I've been selling some of their grass that does have clover in it, aspects to it. So it does provide nitrogen to the soil. It takes nitrogen out of the air and works with a bacteria and makes that nitrogen, that N2, into a nitrate form that's available to grass plants. It also is a good pollinator, as you can see, and it's really something we need to should be able to tolerate to a certain extent. And well, the downside is that it just can't take foot traffic. So if you had a field, say an athletic field, it's all clover. After an event, it would be all kind of slimy, dead grass, dead clover on it. It would return, but after a while.
It's kind of the right plant for the right place. It's kind
Yep.
of,
Yep.
yeah. I think
Go,
John.
go Pevy. This ought to be good.
Yes, Mr. O'Brien. I've been very fastidious about maintaining my lawn over the years. And I've had a professional provide fertilizer to it, weed prevention, everything like that. And it's worked out great. Now we've gone to organic. My contractor has gone to organic fertilizers. The lawn looks green, I guess, but I'm growing a lot of weeds. He says he's put something down for weed, but he says with organic, there isn't much you can do about weeds. And as you mentioned, my lawn's now starting to get overtaken by crabgrass. What do I do?
Boy, can I take off on this one? Really, just so we're everyone understands, and Johnny and I have a long history from college on, and I've been on to his lawn. I've had this discussion private with him over the time. But professionally speaking, John, there is very little for broadleaf weed control and annual weed control that is out there. And there are sometimes, if it's a small area, the best thing to do is pick the weeds out to lower that population aspects to it. The only other device you have is to keep an aggressive overseeding program, like right now, and get a lot of grass plants there, and increase that height of cut, and hopefully that height of cut will help shade that off.
Well, I
Help
just
shade
want to
some of those
interrupt.
plants.
Upon your advice, I did have it overseeded, aerated and overseeded.
Yep.
I didn't see a lot of benefit from that, and the
Yep.
weeds continue to perpetuate throughout the whole yard.
Yeah.
I don't know if I need you out there to pull them one at a time or what I do.
Well, that some people will do that. So it is tough. And then you've been taking care of your lawn. You're out there mowing on a regular basis and irrigating when as needed and stuff. Sometimes lawns will be absolutely neglected, not mowed, and then someone comes in and scalps mow them, and then it all becomes weeds. And there's really no tools to kind of get that cleaned up after that, and that is another issue that comes up to it. It gets devastated. It's almost like a triage type of aspect to it. What will it do for us? So the cases out there, Johnny. There are some people that really can tolerate the types of turf you have. That's great. There are people out there that will go down and dig out the grass plants, and that'll be fine. And then some people have certain soils and certain levels of fertility that's in that soil that don't have anyone doesn't have much of a problem. Now, if you remember, I did test out of my own pocket, paid for your soil test, and took a look at it. Your soil is perfect. If I think I have it someplace, I gave it to you. Your base saturation was perfect. Your liming was probably a little high. If anything else, right? I think it was 6.8, and I remember the organic matter was about 5. So it has nothing to do with the soil. You do have a lot of competition there. You have, you've taken a few trees down, but that's another aspect to consider. Is getting more light in there, and that may help out. But Troy, you can,
Well, I was gonna jump in.
you know who I am and
Yeah.
what I'm talking about, and I don't want to, I'm respectful of the ordinance and respectful of my position, but I'm not going to lie. So
No, I think, but I think I think it's absolutely 100% accurate that there is, for a broadleaf weed control, there's no organic product that's, it's going to replace some other synthetic products. But I think probably part of the answers too is that, it's a process. It's no overnight cure. I think a lot of things you talked about, Jesse, with the aerating, overseeding, and then proper irrigation, uh, over time, it's going to have some impact. Like the mowing taller, I think, is something a lot of people maybe don't consider. If you get the taller turf grass, it's going to shade out some of those other crabgrass type seeds, and over time, over a few seasons, you probably start seeing some impact. But it does take some work.
well, listen, Troy, I've been since this ordinance started. John, I probably averaged like 3 or 4 visits to your house, taking a look at your lawn a year. Right, and he's doing all that we just talked about.
Yeah.
You've been very good about that.
So, anyways, it's tough, and we just well, anyways, this is not the forum to talk about this, but appreciate those comments, Troy.
Yeah, and then I did the couple. I do another question too, in terms of the aerating and top dressing, overseeding. The fall's a good time to do that. Should you top dress the compost after you aerate?
There is this it's sort of like making spaghetti for some people. So there's no real good rule. But one thing is, if you get a good compost, sort of fine, dry compost, and you core aerate, and then you put the compost over, some of that compost will fall down in those holes, and that would be excellent. Getting that in that root zone quicker.
Mhm.
So if that is the case, that's fine. Aspect to it.
And then in terms of mowing, so I know typically we promote people to mow tall for most of the year, like, we, 3.5 inches, 4 inches. Then the fall, do you change the mowing protocol?
Well, again, back to the spaghetti type of aspect to
Mhm.
it. Some people, as it's starting to grow very healthy in the fall, they'll cut back that mowing, and at the last mow, which is typically sometimes up to Thanksgiving
Yep.
or October or so, they'll mow it relatively short. Now, the idea for that is basically you'd have less leaf surface exposed, and you would have less transpiration coming off those leaf surface in the winter, and will be more moisture that will stay in that root system.
Mhm.
That is the purpose of that, and then the other maybe a little bit on the aspect that you would have less leaf surface for any leaf disease such as the snow mold to grow on. So yeah, you can do that, but then other than if you had a whatever a normal winter is anymore and enough snowfall, it really doesn't matter that much. But a lot of people will kind of cut that height down a little bit in the fall, basically to decrease the chances of evapotranspiration.
Well,
Uh,
so go ahead, John, and wrap up the questions. We're almost out of time, I think.
yeah, it's a real quick. Going through a new evaluation in the city. If my lawn looks like hell, my house is probably gonna sell for less money. How do I go about getting an adjustment on my taxes?
You have to speak with the assessor. And
But I
they're
mean, can Mr. Brian give me any professional,
The only thing I
custom?
can say on this, and I've sat in many talks over the years, is a realtor will say that landscaping a property is they say to make sure it's neat. That will help the property sell, and they don't really say it increases values, but if it appears messy, it will sell slower. So there's no real monetary value that from at least the talks I went with realtors, it would say, but it's just the speed of selling.
You're supposed to be a friend. Well, thank you very much. Very
Okay.
informative.
Thank you, Jesse, for coming on to speak today.
Yeah. Hey, Troy, can you
Really,
give me a call when you're done?
sure.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, and I hope that was informative. And
it
see
was
if
super
anyone else.
informative. Thank you.
See if anyone listens to it.
That's it. I didn't know you knew as much as you know.